Welcome to Magic.ai, the operating system for hospitality. At Magic, we know an operating system is more than just software and systems. It's about people, because hospitality is nothing without them. So supporting the hospitality community is our number one goal.
I think there needs to be more of a support system. Like, you have to love this business and you have to love every aspect of it, including sharing tribal knowledge on what is successful and also tribal knowledge of what is a failure.
Founded by lifelong experts, we're building the place where everyone in hospitality, from seasoned pros to first-timers, can gather, share, and grow together. Plus, we're crafting scalable tools and AI-supported software to boost your business. Dive into our vibrant community platform packed with meaningful conversations and robust tools and templates designed just for you. Need more? Our custom software solutions have got you covered. From recruiting and staffing to digital playbooks and dashboards, we're working on building a unique hub of resources unlike any other. Magic is your single point of origin for important conversations, accessible tools, valuable insights, and more. Join us at magic.ai. The evolution of hospitality is here.
I think that innovation comes along only if you're open and curious. Somebody asked me recently, what's the most important thing to continue to have being a cook? And the answer is curiosity.
We are joined today by Norman Van Aken, a celebrated chef and restaurateur. He is best known for introducing fusion into the lexicon of global cookery. He's also known as the founding father of New World Cuisine, a celebration of Latin, Caribbean, Asian American, and African flavors, thus pioneering a new visionary way of cooking in America. He has immortalized his cooking career by authoring 6 cookbooks and a memoir, which we're going to get into. He was inducted into the 2016 Menu Masters Hall of Fame and is a James Beard semifinalist for Best Chef in America. And his namesake restaurant, Norman's, is in Coral Gables, which was just a finalist for Outstanding Restaurant in America.
There's a few things that I always have when I'm writing the menus. I always have a seasonality chart, I have the current menu, and I have my dream sheets. And somewhere between those 3 things, I put together the Venn diagram of where I want to be, where I want to go. My chefs they were feeling sort of lost, frustrated about where their accomplishments were. And I'm like, okay, let's look at this. I want to show you, here's where I was between the age of 25 and 30 and what I'd accomplished. 30 and 35 and 35 and 40 and 40 and 45. 30, no magazine articles. 35, asked to write first book, that kind of thing. How old are you? 26. Look, man, you've got a long time. Just give yourself time to really let this stuff all seep into you.
Welcome, Chef Norman Van Aken.
Well, thank you so much.
You are someone in my mind that embodies that perspective that you are a cook first, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Not necessarily a chef, although you are a celebrated and revered chef.
Yeah.
I think that, hearing you say that is really interesting. And I want to kind of set the scene a little bit for our conversation and having you bring us into that world, because our understanding is that it looks like you started working in restaurants in Florida in your kind of teens, young 20s, right? So can you tell us a little bit about that and what your first job was and how you fell in love with it?
Yeah, for sure. I had no idea that cooking was going to be in my life. Growing up, there were things on television like The Galloping Gourmet and Julia Child and all of that. I watched none of that. Interestingly, though, my mom was a waitress, and then as she grew a little older, she became a manager, and she was in the restaurant business and loved the restaurant business. My mother and father split when I was 9. My mom would occasionally, draft my sisters and I or something. Hey, the busboys, didn't show up. Would you come over after school? Whatever. So I did touch the restaurant world, but still, it was not at all in my mindset. And I don't know what was. I mean, I was more interested in bands and literature and girls and didn't know what the heck I was doing. And so high school ended and I did go to college briefly. I was trying to stay out of Vietnam because people were coming back in caskets, and I didn't want to have any part of that. And so there was a draft going on, Nixon and all of that. But eventually I got out of the scope of that rifle, but you know, my father passed on, and I needed to find a way to make my own living. Not that my father was around to help me with making a living, after the age of 17. Um, God bless him, but he just wasn't there. So I started working in the jobs that were available to a young person growing up in Northern Illinois with no experience or education that was going to take them very far. What did that mean? Factories. I
Hmm.
worked in a glass factory, which was a Ball Brothers factory, where my job was to shovel up the broken jars that had fallen off an assembly line and put them back onto a conveyor belt so they could be remelted and made into glass. So essentially, you're breathing glass for 8 hours a day. So
Wow.
back then, the first thing I did every day was smoke a big joint and then go to work. And then I got a job as a hot top. Well, there was other. I was a. I sold flowers in Honolulu. I worked in a carnival, putting together the rides, running the rides, going from town to town for a beautiful summer until I got almost electrocuted to death on a faulty Ferris wheel that I was trying to help move. Then I got a job
Goodness.
as a hot car roofer, and that was in the summer of 1972. And a beautiful rainstorm came rolling up out of the sky like something out of, Cecil B. DeMille, roll. You could see it coming at us like, holy shit, we got to get down these ladders. We got to get into our trucks. It's going to get, lightning. We're going to get fried up here on this
Yeah.
roof. And so the light and the storm came, and everybody ran to their truck except me. I didn't do that. I started rolling around on the grass of the football field because we were hot tar roofing a high school. And my boss was not a very humorous man. And when I was in the middle of a roll, I ran into his legs. And I looked up, and he looked down at me upside down because he had his hat and wraparound shades. And he basically said, "Get the fuck out." And I was like, "Yeah, well, fuck you too." And then I got in my car, and I was like, "Yeah." And then I got about halfway down the road, and I went, "Oh, wait, rent's due. Now what?"
Right, right, right.
Yeah. And so we had this thing in our area of Northern Illinois where it was called the Advertiser. And essentially, it was like a newspaper, but not so much for news. It was all ads. I mean, you could buy a boat motor, you could buy a knife, or you could look for work. And so there was an ad in that paper that said, "Short order cook needed, no experience necessary." I circled that, and then I thought about it, and then, okay, I got to go to this place and I got to apply for this job, which I did. I went back to where I was living, which was a farmhouse with about seven other miscreants, and I found a high school sweater and I pulled it on over my shitty shirt, and I tucked my ponytail underneath that sweater
Oh my
and went
God.
in and I applied for a job. And it was a diner. I mean, it was the diner actually of our town, the next town over. It was the diner that I went to with my grandmother when I was 5. It was the diner that I
Wow.
went to after
Mm.
movies sometimes. It was a familiar place to me, but they didn't know me from, Adam. And so I applied for the job, and they said, "Okay, 3.25 an hour, okay?" I said, "Yeah, be fine." And they said, "Okay, come back tomorrow, you start." So I drove my $100 vehicle home, and then I got there and went, "What time do I have to be there?" And they said, 6. So I went to a hardware store and bought an alarm clock, and and then I came back, and then I started the next day. And of course, in the midst of that, the ponytail came out, and kind of had a
Oh
moment.
my
And but
gosh.
they were Midwestern folk. They were, they kind of stuck by their word, and I stuck by mine. And that was how I got into the restaurant business, as far as being a cook.
Wow.
That's
Wow.
amazing.
You've had
That's
such a
amazing.
long and decorated career. Did you think, I mean, when you circled that job and you went to the diner and they said, it's 3.25 an hour, did you ever think that you would be in hospitality cooking still this many years later?
Carolyn, I cooked for 6 or 7 years before I accepted that fate.
Okay.
I
That
It
seems
wasn't
fair.
the
Yeah.
same. It was not. There was nobody. It wasn't like my aspirations were more toward writing and or being in a band, and I was doing it, but not for pay. I mean, nobody made any
Right.
money. But I was into songwriters much more than I was into the idea. But nobody I knew was. I was
Right.
Most of my friends were carpenters and plumbers, and
Hmm.
maybe one could have been a school teacher, but nobody was like lighting it up, except for lighting it up. Um, It took a while, but it was interesting though. I've had this circular relationship with Key West, and it wasn't long after that job in the diner at all. It wasn't long one bit where I heard a friend of mine was down in Key West, and I went down there. Uh, I was at a party in Champaign Urbana, and some friends were there, and we were like, it was April. I was so sick of winter, and somebody said, "Hey, Steve's down in Key West." And I was like, "Hey, where's Key West?" And they said, "You go to Miami and keep going." And I'm like, "Nah, I hate winter. Anybody want to go to Key West?" And these two brothers said, "Yeah, let's go." And I said, "When do you want to go?" They said, "Let's go tonight." And they had a van, and we got some stuff that help you stay awake. And 36 hours we pulled into Key West. And my best friend's older brother was living down there. He kind of had to get out of town because he was in trouble. But oh my God, as soon as I got to Key West, it was a day later when I'm in love, like you're in love with a girl, that kind of love. You're just,
Giddy.
this place is
Yeah.
magical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't last long because I was 19 or 20, and I had no skills, and hadn't started cooking yet. But I say circular relationship with Key West because then I began to go back, and it took me 3 tries, but I finally landed in Key West, got a job, and started cooking. But still, it was not in my mind. This was a future. This was it.
Right.
It was. I started that first job. It was 71 or 72. 71. I said 72. It was 71 is correct. It was fall, and I know that where I was working was in 1979. I was working in a hotel in Key West, and for the first time, I was around people that were serious about food.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it was another, I mean, the people back in the diner or the people in the Holiday Inn in Colorado or the people that, were in the barbecue place in Illinois that I worked, they're serious. They were hardworking, working class people that were serious about making sure that they had enough money to put food on their table. They were serious in that way, but
Hmm.
they hadn't been to school. They didn't know the terminology or the classic methodology of cooking or any of that stuff. And I was always a reader. I was always purposefully educating myself in any way that I could. Well, when I was there amidst these people, and then some of them were younger than me at that time, which meant they were 32 or something, but they had been to CIA. And one
Mm.
of these guys used a term one time, and I said, "How the hell do you even know what that term is?" And he goes, "Well, I went to the CIA." And I'm like, "Oh, how much did that cost?" And he told me, and I realized that was a moonshot. But then he said, why don't you read?" And I was like, "Why don't you just go fuck yourself?" I read, man.
Yeah.
I read Dostoevsky. I'm reading Norman Mailer right now, trying to show off for the guy. And he's like, "I meant cookbooks, bud. I meant books on cooking."
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
was like, "Oh yeah, like who?" Like, I didn't wanna give this guy the satisfaction of being, like, smart. He said James
Yeah.
Beard would be a good idea. I was like, "Never heard of
Hmm.
the guy," and I pretended not to care. But then that day, and I do not know how I had the money or the check in my wallet or whatever, but I went to the bookstore in Key West, and I bought James Beard's Theory and Practice of Good Cooking.
Mm.
And it was 1979, that was the first book that I bought, and for the first time, I felt like the scales were now gonna fall off my eyes, and I was gonna begin to see, and that book was brilliant, because it wasn't just a collection of appetizer, salad, entrees, dessert, it was done by technique, broiling,
Mm.
sautéing, raw, whatever, so it really helped kind of provide a schematic for me to understand. And then, man, then I was like, I started to get into it. I bought a knife, you know.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. Oh, man, that
Slippery
first knife
slope.
that really
Slippery
fits
slope.
your hands. Oh, it's a good
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
feeling.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I'd wrap it up in a kitchen towel and put it in my bike basket and take it home every night and bring it back the
Mhm.
next day. And that was the beginning for me. And within a short period of time, I went from, a person who worked as a cook to a person who then saw, I saw the world from another place. And then I began to read about all the regional American cuisine that was going on and learning about people like Alice Waters and Jeremiah Tower and Paul Prudhomme.
Mhm.
And when you say it like this, it sounds like it happened in half an hour, but it really took, an arc of time for it to happen.
Mm.
This is all preceding to me ever meeting Charlie.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a whole nother that
Yeah, it's a
too.
whole nother chapter. Yeah. Well, I'm actually glad that you mentioned Alice Waters because, from being stoned and shoveling glass in Illinois to this just masterful culinarian that you have become, there's obviously a huge story there, right? And we can't compartmentalize it. I think there's so many chapters there. Um, but one of the things in my mind that you really mastered was this ability to kind of take old world technique and fuse it with new world ingredients, right? And really kind of nobody was doing that. Excuse me. Nobody was doing that. Nobody was doing coastal Southern Floridian cuisine, right? Alice was kind of had her approach with California cuisine, but it wasn't happening at all on the East Coast. And you were really instrumental in creating this new narrative of Southeastern cuisine, right? So how did that start, and how did diners react to that?
Yeah. I really feel blessed by the fact that I came of age just when America was beginning to get that kind of curiosity. The first jobs I had working in quote unquote continental restaurants, they could have cared less. They were cooking French food, and you better get with the program, buddy.
Mhm.
Um, it's but it was happening in America, and there was the California food movement, and people like
Mhm.
Mark Miller and Dean Fearing and Robert Del Grande were doing the Southwestern food movement, and magazine articles were coming out. And while I couldn't go to cooking school, I could buy a magazine and I could learn about those things.
Mhm.
But I guess, you know, because of my long interest in books and storytelling, uh, I realized that there was a void, that no one was really giving voice to this in the southeastern region. I
Mhm.
mean, people, of course, were doing amazing things with food always. I mean, the classic Southern repertoire of dishes didn't need me to come along and show them anything. But you used the word fusion or fused, and that was very much the thing that I did that was different. There was a synthesis in what I did and what I was in love with doing that was a type of culinary riffing and,
Mhm.
like a jazz musician riffing. And I had a facility for it. I think in many ways I was lucky that because I wasn't from Key West or Miami in the Southern Florida world as the children of, let's say, a Cuban family. There was no abuela to beat me over the head for the license I took for doing things with dishes that were traditional dishes that the family honored for 2 or 3 or 4
Sure,
generations or whatever.
sure.
And I was like, well, and I had the bug, what if, I mean, what if I did take a
Mm.
Réveillon from me knowing enough about French cuisine from coming up in those ranks, and
Mhm.
I folded some mojo into it, and I made a mojo sabayon. Well, you know, that was another language. I mean, you were talking like in Esperanto or something. It's just people weren't used to it.
Mhm.
Um, I was really lucky to land in Key West, especially back then because I had a chance to get my chops together, to kind of be off Broadway in a way and learn how to do what I sensed I needed to do, and then to be discovered by a vice president in charge of creative development for Random House,
Mm.
and be asked to write my first cookbook. I had now been woodshedding for 10 or 15 years, 15 years when that opportunity came along. And but with the first cookbook, I wasn't quite there yet with my, with the vision that I became more well known for. I didn't call it New World Cuisine, and I didn't quite have. I was still on the training wheels of
Mhm.
European cuisine when I wrote it, but it was, you could see it coming. It's like Steamboat Willie, right? You can see that one day that guy's going to become Mickey Mouse, right? You can see the antecedent aspects of it. But it was coming, and my curiosity just kept me, looking and seeing, where how can I do this? But I did know very early on that I wanted to be specific geographically more. I didn't want to. I mean, I'm all for all the cuisines for all over, but I knew that, like Faulkner, his power was in maintaining his relevance related to this county in Mississippi that his imaginary characters were all in. I knew that my power,
Mm.
I felt my power was going to be by um, staying true to this area, geographical area. Now that gave me a great latitude because of all the migrations, immigrant cultures that were coming in, and also the mother countries to it. I mean, you can't cook
Mm.
in South Florida without being affected by Cuba, Spain,
Mhm.
and Argentina, and
Yep.
Brazil, and
Mhm.
that's a mother load of territory.
Where were you getting inspiration for these new flavors? Like, did you have, was it mostly through reading? Was it through eating in other
Yeah.
places in Southern Florida? Was it friends or family?
Well, friends and family, it's like an epiphany in a sense. I was working at Louis' Backyard, which is a place that really was a breakthrough for me, but I was still holding on to a lot of European ways and thinking, and
Mhm.
in my menus and the way I was expressing. And I'll tell you, what happened is I was in the morning before any customers would come. It was just beautiful to go out on this deck because Louis is situated right on the Gulf of Mexico, one of the most beautiful
Mhm.
locations you could ever have a restaurant. And I was privileged in many ways, lucky to be there. And I was out there. It was a cooler morning for Key West, and I had like three or four cokes and a cup of a cafe con leche, and I was looking at the books and thinking about what I was going to put on the menu that night, which was my thing. By that time, I was a cookbook guy, and that was one of the ways. Um, but then I noticed this boat out of the corner of my eye coming across the horizon, going toward the horizon, and it was just a beautiful, beautiful morning, and the sun is just shining on those waters. And I put the book down for a minute, and I'm looking at it, and I go, "Where are they going?" I'm by myself. I'm just pondering, where are they going? And I realized they're probably going to Cuba. And then I thought, well, what are they eating on that boat? And what are they going to eat when they get there?
Mm.
And there was this, vibe of like, why am I cooking out of these books from all over the place when somebody needs to tell the story of here?
Mm,
And
mm,
so I purposefully and willingly forced myself into a much tighter lens.
mhm.
And
Mm.
so I put the books away, and I began to go back to the very same bodegas, restaurants, little Caribbean markets. And I began now to look at it like, okay, I have to cook from here. I,
Yeah.
I need to put a
Mhm.
real tight
Yeah.
focus on this. For me to learn it, I need to cook from here. And so I began to go to these places and have my little notebook, and I didn't speak enough Spanish to really understand a lot of it because these were Spanish speaking restaurants, Spanish speaking people. But
Mhm.
I would, what is that? What is that? What is that? And sometimes they'd look at me like, well, what are you writing a book? Or, what's your deal here, man? But it was just, I was curious. And you asked me, Carolyn, you asked me how I learned. It was a combination of, I don't want to give the impression that it was books and books and books. It was a real, it was being in this, Raymond Sokolov calls it a colonial laboratory of cuisine. And he's talking about the
Mhm.
totality of the Caribbean. But it was by being there that I had the opportunity to absorb it uncut, unfiltered, firsthand,
Mhm.
by going to the little joints, the place where they were
Mhm.
cooking for the working class people of the town.
Yeah.
And it was, whether it was a Bahamian or Haitian or Cuban, I was getting abuela kind of cuisine, and I was loving it.
Mhm.
So you got it, Matthew, when you talked earlier about the aspect of fusion cuisine that many people, I see there's two definitions in a dictionary. Is often always two definitions of any word. I mean, just pick a word. You know, gate can mean this or it could mean that. But for
Mhm.
fusion, most people pick up only on the hyphenation between, say, a French and a Thai dish
Mhm.
being on the same plate. That
Right.
to them is fusion. I don't dispute that. In many ways, that is how that happens. But the fusion that I was really more taken with when I originally wrote this essay, which was just not an essay for anybody else but myself, was my hope and wish that my food would be an embrace between the intellectual, technically proficient aspect of things that I did learn
Mhm.
from, as Tony would say, the overlords, um, but also with that cuddling between the mama cuisines,
Mhm.
the power, honesty, and the straightforward aspects of the food I was tasting in these little cafes. I wanted
Sort of,
that
yeah.
view. I
Yeah.
wanted.
Right.
I mean, yeah, we could an amazing, lobster or a veal chop or something expensive, something like that you would have in a fine dining restaurant. But I want to marinate it in a way that would have been marinated, in that dish over there. So I began to
Yeah.
put those things together in that way.
Mhm.
Well, you
Right.
use the term the laboratory of cuisine, and I love that because for me, just that concept kind of embodies who you are as a chef because it's the way you tell the story. It seems very organic, right? And in many ways, I'm sure it felt that way. But really, what we're talking about is innovation, right? I mean that really is kind of the word that manifests itself through your work. And so I'm wondering kind of what your philosophy is around innovation. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I mean, I think particularly as it pertains to the training that you received as a chef, somewhat classical, and where you wanted to go, right? I mean, there's a great kind of story of an innovative culture that happened within your restaurant's walls, I think.
Yeah, I would be perceived from the outside, I'm sure, as being incredibly innovative, um, and I'm glad. And I think that innovation comes along only if you're open and curious.
Mhm.
Somebody asked me recently, what's the most important thing to continue to have being a cook, and the answer is curiosity.
Mhm.
To be mystified and marveled, and you're like,
Mm.
wow.
Mm. So maybe it's more curiosity than innovation, right? In a
Yeah, but,
sense.
because now I'm at a point, and I think we've all come to a point where we see that this innovation becomes too much about the innovator and not enough about the natural world, um,
Mm.
not enough about the natural uh, evolution of people.
I just made a post about that on my Instagram literally yesterday or 2 days ago because I think if innovation for innovation's sake is kind of meaningless, right? Unless you begin with the foundations of great technique and a reverence for ingredient and really understanding those ingredients, it's all just performative, right? But if you can hit that sweet spot where you're doing a little bit of all those things and taking all of those aspects into consideration, it can be a little otherworldly, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and somebody wrote a really good piece on the world's 50 best recently. The
Mm.
what is it, the Pellegrino world's 50 best, and what that's become, and it has become so detached from the world that most of us live in, and the kind of people that can afford to go to those restaurants, and what their background is and what their requirements are, is so far from the people who motivated me so strongly in the beginning years, like the works of James Beard or Alice Waters or Paul Prudhomme or Jeremiah Tower, the people who, or MFK, I mean, the people who
Mm.
had that. It was never about them. It was all about the flavor that people of the world were making, the village was making. It wasn't.
Yep.
I mean, innovation's a great thing, and I don't poo-poo innovation, but I just think that it's more imagination and it's more inspiration than it is the other anymore. It's become a little too tricky in some ways, and I, it's like, to get it. Do you get it? Do you get my dish?
Yeah, yeah,
Right,
yeah.
right,
Yeah.
That
right.
kind of thing.
Yep. Do
Like,
you see what I did? Yeah.
it's like, hey,
Yeah,
man,
yeah.
Well, but now you're in a position where you kind of have to mentor this philosophy to other folks on your team, right? I mean, as it relates to someone who has been a lifelong kind of stalwart, well-respected chef. Obviously, you reach a point in your career where you don't just do this alone, right? You have a team that
true.
you have to kind of bring with you and bring along for that ride and be able to story tell this stuff to. How do you do that? How do you do that now as it relates to getting your team inspired about, your vision?
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, there's, like many that you will have on your show. People will have 10 restaurants, and the amount of people that you need to inspire. There was a period of time when we had 4 Norman's restaurants that went from Miami to Los Angeles, and
Mm.
I had to learn a different form of communication than being one on one in the room with you and let's
Mhm.
taste this together, to do it in a way that transcended vast distances. Now we're doing this right here together today. This Zoom call form. We didn't have this technology 10 years ago.
Right.
It's a way that we can almost, be in the same room together. We can't really, reach out and taste the same things together. But for me, I always like to really know the people who work in the kitchens. I almost said know my chefs, and I don't think of them as my chefs. I think of them as the team. Um,
Mm.
and they I certainly look up to me at points where I have to remind them I'm human. You know, you know, I'm not a mythological creature. Let's taste something together.
Yeah.
Um, it, but I kind of fortunate, I think, with the team that I have right now, that they do understand the message. They barely ever come to me with something that seems like it was created for another restaurant in another time zone in
Mm.
another place, or it's overly manipulated. I think they've heard me a lot.
So to get your team sort of on the same page, is it just not just, is it a lot about communication? Is it about spending time with them in the kitchen, cooking together, cooking side by side, showing them dishes? How long does it take? It sounds like right now you have a really great team. That's fantastic. But how does that come about, right? From hiring and training, that takes a long time. I'd love to hear more about that process of how you get to having a great team.
Right? Yeah. Well, we can't say enough about mentoring. I think that's extremely important, and I'm glad to see some really accomplished chefs doing a really great job with mentoring, like Daniel Boulou or Alain Ducasse. Charlie was a great mentor. He could be a really tough mentor, but he was a great mentor.
Mhm.
Um, I can't say enough about mentoring.
Mhm.
Ever since the almost the very beginning, I for whatever reason, but I keep what I call dream sheets, and dream sheets are half cooked ideas, parts of ideas, tastes, flavors, whatever. I mean, it began like with a notebook like this, and me just writing these things down until it became so voluminous and that coincided with learning how to work on a computer because my 10-year-old son was teaching me how to do it at that time, to putting the dream sheets onto a computer and then be able
Mhm.
to um, take the dream sheets and go, here, here, chefs. These are my current dream sheets, and
Mm.
take anything that you want from there. Let me see where you get with it. This
Mm.
actually is what's called a seasonality chart, because There's a few things that I always have when I'm writing the menus. I always have the seasonality chart, I have the current menu, and I have my dream sheets. And somewhere between those three things, I put together, the Venn diagram of where I want to be, where I want to go.
I love
I want
that.
to understand there's pivot points that they should always have in their minds when they go to create. And
Mm.
seasonality is one of the main ones, of course. And
Mhm.
then my dream sheets, which are going to reflect um, the artistic geography of where we've been, and then we
Mhm.
also have the current status. What is the menu right now?
Mhm.
And we have other information like how much, what's very popular, what is considered a
Mhm.
signature dish, those types of
Mhm.
things. So we have a
Yep.
lot of drivers but not so many that it's confusion.
So are the dream sheets kind of rough ideas or sketches that, kind of you want to continue to try and flesh out with the
Yeah.
team? Or
Yeah, yeah, it's like you hear the stories about Dylan having little snatches of newspapers and cocktail napkins and in his pockets and stuff, and then he sits down and he tries to write, "Blown in the Wind" or something like that. To me, that probably was um, part of the where I came up with that whole thing because you never know when inspiration's going to strike.
Mhm.
I might pull out a little recorder, when I wake up in the middle of the night and I know where the buttons are, even in the dark, and go, chanterelles and apricots, fall asleep.
so
That's
what type
awesome.
of leader are you? Like it's I'm getting the picture that you lean into the team for their involvement, right? Like you're not somebody who necessarily is standing over and at a hyper involved level really driving the execution and the expectations, but more about kind of gently leading them or shepherding them right into what the possibilities could be.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at this point, it's become like that. Our chef de cuisine has been with me for 14 years. So
Mm.
there's a lot of history with that. Pastry chef's been with me for 6 years. So, there's a lot of strong uh, parts where people were, but, uh, you know, once I was sort of getting to a point where my chefs they were feeling sort of lost and frustrated about where their accomplishments were. And I'm like, okay, let's look at this. Let's get this down on paper if we need to. But I want to show you. Here's where I was between the age of 25 and 30 and what I'd accomplished. And 30 and 35 and 35 and 40 and 40 and 45. 30, no magazine articles. 35, asked to write first book. 40, that kind of thing. How old are you? 26. Look, man or woman, you've got a long time.
Yeah.
Just give
Mm.
yourself time to really let this stuff all seep into you. Don't
Mm.
feel like you are not making it because Food and Wine hasn't, come a knocking and
Mhm.
here you are. And how come you're not in it? When somebody else is and somebody else, and it's worse now than ever because of social media and all the people that feel like shit because they don't have 100,000 followers on Instagram or whatever the latest thing
Mhm.
is, right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
they
Um,
absolutely.
but because I came up, when I was at Louis and I was writing that first cookbook, I was saute. I was in the kitchen, so there was a long, long time and when I opened up Norman's in 95, the original one, it was great because we had these two wood burning ovens that were in the dining room. This was a failed Italian restaurant that we bought for a song. But we had these beautiful wood burning ovens, and I was able to be cooking, but also be in the dining room.
Mm.
And that went on for years. So I was able to be with my team and cooking with them and explaining this is a stratification sauce and this is when you need to add the vinegar until a whole lot of time together had gone down.
Who is the one person you hired that transformed your business?
That transformed our business.
Yeah.
One person I hired transformed our business.
Mhm.
Well, I think that when I hired Charlie Trotter, he transformed a lot of people's business.
Mm,
because of his because of the courage that he had to be the person who he was,
mm,
by making a restaurant of such grand and gutsy power that that restaurant was. When I could pull out a menu from being at one of the events, and you wouldn't believe the 10 chefs that would have been in that kitchen at the same time. Nobody in America was doing what Charlie was doing. So
mm.
that was, he was this sounds crazy, but Charlie was a busboy when he asked me for a job in the kitchen. He had not been in a kitchen before.
Wow,
It's incredible.
that's
It's
incredible.
incredible.
Yeah.
And we
Okay.
hit it off. Say we hit it off
Oh,
as an
yeah.
understatement. It took a little bit because, I mean, he was really green at first, but boy, did he come along.
He came along.
Mhm.
He came along, I would
Came
say.
along real well.
I would say so. I have one about marketing, and I think that it's specific in terms of you have obviously maybe knowingly, unknowingly, I'm not sure, but there's been a great of attention given to how you have marketed both yourself and the restaurants, and I'm wondering if there's something in there, some sort of tool or decision that you made that was instrumental in helping you kind of get the word out about who you were and what you were doing.
One part about this that I want to touch base on is knowing when to say no. Um,
Mm,
when
Mm,
you talk about marketing, I think people think it's just like go 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 go, just always accept. You be
mm,
there, do it all, whatever. Um, when Top Chef, the show Top Chef came on, I was been friends with Tom Colicchio for a good long while and admire his work, and had done dinners together in Gramercy and him down at Norman's. Anyway, he asked me to be on Top Chef. I was twice, uh, and then at kind of a challenging point in my career, I'd gone back to Key West to do this big project, and I was a little bit out of the super limelight because I was back down on the island. And they asked me, or somebody, I guess Magical Elves, asked me to do Top Chef Master. And when I learned about it and how they could pretty much create characters within the scope of that show, I turned it down.
mm,
And I remember having
mm,
a lot of conversations with another person who was invited to do the Top Chef Masters that season, which was Tracy Desjardins from San Francisco.
mhm,
I remember walking around the block in my neighborhood on the cell phone by this point in time going, "You gonna do it? I don't know. Are you gonna do it? What do you think about it?" And then I think I
mm,
saw an episode, and I don't even want to say who that chef was because it wouldn't be fair, but I just went, "That's not like that chef." They
mm,
they
mm,
they they created something there. And I went, "You know what?
mm,
I'd rather be at this age of my life and be more of a less well-known person than a person perceived for not who I wanna be."
mm.
So marketing sometimes means not doing something.
that's powerful. Yeah, it's true.
Gosh.
It's true.
Wow.
I feel
Okay.
like we need to have another episode with you
I
because
know it's
there's
like
so much
Norman
more.
part 2. Feel like there's so much to learn. I can't even.
I know,
Yeah.
Chef. Maybe we can convince you to come back at some point.
It would be my pleasure. I promise you I'd be happy to.